I want to say something to you tonight that I believe will forever alter the way you see your own life. Not adjust it, not slightly shift it, alter it permanently. Because I have been watching people carry a particular wound for a very long time. I have sat with them, spoken with them, received their letters, and in every case, beneath whatever surface question they were asking, there was this same wound, this same quiet, persistent, devastating belief. I am not wanted, not in those words, necessarily. Sometimes it comes dressed as a question about purpose. Sometimes it arrives wearing the language of spiritual seeking. But strip it all away, and what you find at the very center of the thing is a person who has looked at the conditions of their social life, the absence of close friendship, the difficulty of deep connection, the sense of moving through the world somehow out of phase with everyone around them, and has concluded in the most private chamber of their heart. This means something terrible about who they are. I am here tonight to dismantle that conclusion completely, not to comfort you. I'm not interested in comfort that leaves the false belief intact. I am interested in truth, the kind of truth that, once it enters you, reorganizes everything else around it. So stay with me. What I am about to share with you is not philosophy. It is not religious sentiment dressed up in elevated language. It is a precise description of how consciousness operates. And once you see it, you will not be able to unsee it now. The scripture says, and I have given my entire life to living inside these words. Many are called, but few are chosen. Most people read that line and nod and move on. They treat it as poetic, as ancient decoration on the walls of a tradition they half believe. But I want you to stop at that sentence tonight and actually look at what it is saying. Many are called, few are chosen. This is not a statement about divine favoritism. It is not God sitting on a throne arbitrarily, pointing at some and ignoring others. It is a description of spiritual law, the same kind of precise, operative, impersonal law that governs how a seed becomes a tree or how iron becomes steel. It is describing something that is happening right now in the structure of your life, whether you recognize it or not. The called are everywhere. Look around you. The world is full of people who have received the call in one form or another. The longing for something more, the hunger for meaning, the sense that life is supposed to be larger than it has yet become. That call goes out broadly, indiscriminately, to multitudes. The chosen, are those in whom that call has taken root so deeply that it has begun to reorganize the entire structure of their existence around itself. That reorganization, I want you to understand, is not always comfortable. It is not always socially convenient. In fact, it almost never is. Because when your life is being reorganized around a specific and significant purpose, everything that does not serve that purpose begins, naturally and inevitably, to fall away, including very often the easy social world that others seem to inhabit without effort. Let me tell you something about the nature of preparation, real preparation, the kind that happens at the level of consciousness, rather than merely at the level of skill or information. When something of great significance is being formed, it requires conditions that ordinary life does not provide. A diamond is not formed at the surface. It is formed under pressures and in depths that the surface world knows nothing about. The process is invisible from the outside. It takes time that cannot be rushed, and during that entire process, the diamond is not accessible. It is not socializing. It is not circulating. It is not making itself available to the casual gaze. It is becoming. When it finally emerges, when the conditions are right and the formation is complete, what appears is something of such concentrated brilliance that it could not have been produced any other way. I'm asking you tonight to consider that this is what is happening in your life, not as metaphor, not as consolation, as literal spiritual mechanics. Your solitude is not the absence of something that should be there. It is the presence of a process that requires exactly these conditions to proceed. Now I want to speak carefully about something that I think is at the heart of your confusion, because I have seen this confusion destroy people who were on the very edge of their breakthrough. The confusion is this: you have been taught by everything around you, by your culture, by your upbringing, unspoken assumptions of the social world, that the measure of a person's worth is their social abundance, their friendships, their connections, ability to move easily through the world of human relationship. So, when you find yourself unable to do that easily, when you find that the social world feels effortful in ways it does not seem to feel for others, when you find that your connections are few or shallow or persistently difficult to maintain, you reach immediately for the only conclusion your conditioning has prepared you to reach. Something is wrong with me. But I want you to consider a different possibility entirely. What if the social ease that you lack is not a deficiency, but a consequence? What if it is a consequence of the fact that your consciousness is operating at a frequency that simply does not produce easy surface level connection? Not because you are broken, but because depth and breadth cannot occupy the same space. Water that spreads itself across an enormous flat surface has no depth. Water that is concentrated in a single narrow channel runs with tremendous force and can carve through stone. You are not the flat surface. You have never been the flat surface. The force that is concentrated in you, the depth that your solitude has been building, will do things that the spread and shallow water never could. The scripture says, "Be still and know that I am God." I want you to sit with every word of that for a moment. Be still, not be busy, not be surrounded, not be constantly engaged with the social machinery of life. Be still and know, not believe, not hope, not wish. Know, with a kind of interior certainty that does not require external confirmation, that I am God, that the infinite creative intelligence of the universe is not somewhere outside of you, dispensing favor to the well-connected and withholding it from the solitary. It is within you. It is what you are made of. And it is most accessible, most fully, most powerfully accessible in exactly the condition you have been taught to be most ashamed of. The stillness, your quiet, your solitude. The great mystics have always known this. The great creators have always known this. The people who have changed the direction of human history have remarkable consistency, known periods of profound isolation that preceded their most significant work, not as coincidence, as necessity. Moses in the wilderness for 40 years before he stood before Pharaoh. Paul in the Arabian desert for 3 years before he began the work that would reshape the ancient world. Jesus himself. And I want you to mark this constantly withdrawing. And in the morning, rising up a great while before day, he went out and departed into a solitary place. This was not a man who had failed at friendship. This was a man who understood in his bones that the power he carried required a specific kind of nourishment that only solitude could provide. You cannot simultaneously pour yourself out and fill yourself up. And the chosen ones are, above everything else, people who have something to pour. Now let me introduce you to what I call the law of vibrational incompatibility. Because I think when you truly understand this law, something will release in you that has been held tight for a very long time as a person's consciousness expands. And I mean this quite literally. Their awareness of what they are and what life is and what is possible begins to deepen and widen. They discover something that is initially quite painful. Discover that the social world they previously inhabited no longer quite fits, not because they have become arrogant. I want to be very clear about that, because I have seen people misuse this understanding in precisely that way, and it is a corruption of the truth. The expansion of consciousness does not produce superiority. It produces something altogether different. It produces an inability to pretend. The person whose consciousness is expanding simply cannot maintain the performances that ordinary social life requires. Not laugh convincingly at what no longer strikes him as funny. Cannot invest energy in conversations that feel to him like elaborate ways of avoiding anything real. Not shrink himself. And this is the crucial thing. Cannot shrink himself down to the size that a particular room or relationship demands. He can feel himself growing in a direction that the room was not built for. And the people around him feel this. They cannot name it. They would not know how to explain it if you ask them. They feel the dissonance, and they respond to it by gradually, often without any conscious decision, increasing their distance, and the expanding person is left standing alone, wondering what they did wrong. They did nothing wrong. What happened is that two rivers tried to flow in different directions from the same source. And the law of consciousness, which is as precise and as impersonal as the law of gravity, simply did its work. The scripture describes this with absolute economy. Two walk together except they be agreed. Not agreed in opinion, not agreed in taste or preference or theology, agreed at the level of direction, the fundamental orientation of what the soul is moving toward. When two people are moving toward the same thing, they can walk together indefinitely. When they are moving toward fundamentally different things, no amount of goodwill or fond feeling can sustain the walking indefinitely. This is not tragedy. This is precision. Let me tell you about the vacuum of higher purpose, because this is something I have observed again and again in the lives of people who are on the edge of their real work. Ordinary social connection falls away when the friendships that sustained you at an earlier stage of your development begin to thin. When you find yourself with empty evenings and quiet weekends, that your previous life would have been filled with company, something happens in the interior life that is extremely difficult to tolerate at first. Vacuum forms, and a vacuum by its very nature creates pressure. The pressure of emptiness, the discomfort of unfilled space, and most people, encountering that pressure, do one of two things. They either rush to fill the vacuum with whatever is available, any company, any distraction, any stimulation that will relieve the pressure, or they collapse inward under the weight of it and call what they feel loneliness and treat it as evidence of their failure. But there is a third possibility, and it is the only one that leads anywhere worth going. You can hold the vacuum. You can resist the impulse to fill it with something cheap. You can stay with the discomfort of the unfilled space long enough for something to happen that cannot happen any other way. Because nature does not only abhor a vacuum, nature also, given sufficient time and the right conditions, fills a vacuum with exactly what belongs there. And what belongs in the vacuum of a chosen life is not ordinary social connection. What belongs there, what will come, if you hold the space long enough, is the fullness of your own purpose, the clarity of your own calling, the power of your own concentrated, unscattered, undiluted consciousness, meeting the work it was always meant to do. I have seen this happen. I've seen people who had spent years in painful isolation suddenly break through into a period of such extraordinary creativity, such profound connection with what they were meant to be and do. The years of solitude were instantly recontextualized, not erased, not explained away, recontextualized, revealed to have been not the absence of their life, but the construction of it. The scripture says, "Before I formed thee in the belly I knew thee, before you were born, before the first breath, before any of the circumstances of your life had arranged themselves into the particular shape they now hold, there was already a knowing, a recognition, a specific and irreplaceable intention. I want you to feel the weight of that. You were not produced randomly and then left to make what you could of an indifferent universe. You were known specifically, individually, precisely known before the machinery of your life was even set in motion. And the machinery of your life, including the parts of it that have brought you pain, including the isolation and the difficulty, and the sense of being perpetually out of step with the social world around you, been running in service of that original knowing. Everything, everything, including the things that hurt the most. This is what the scripture means when it says, "The stone which the builders rejected has become the head of the corner." The builders looked at the stone, and they saw something that did not fit, something that did not conform to the standard dimensions, something that seemed by every reasonable measure to be wrong for the project. And they set it aside. And they built their structures without it. But the architect, the one who actually understood what the building was for, looked at that same stone and saw something the builders could not see, saw the exact shape that was needed for the most critical position in the entire structure, the cornerstone, the one piece upon which everything else would rest. Rejection by the social world. I am speaking to you directly. Now I want you to hear this, your rejection, your exclusion, your sense of not fitting, inability to move easily through the circles where others seem so naturally to belong. This is not the verdict of the builders. This is the selection of the architect. And now I want to address something that I think is absolutely essential, because without it, everything else I have said tonight could be misused. Understanding I am offering you is not a license for bitterness. It is not a spiritual justification for contempt. It is not permission to look at the people who have social ease and friendships and connection, and to console yourself with the thought that you are simply operating at a higher frequency than they are, that you are chosen, and they are merely called. That reading would corrupt the entire truth of what I am saying. Genuine expansion of consciousness does not produce contempt for those at an earlier stage of expansion. It produces compassion. The person who truly understands what I am describing tonight will not feel superior to the socially comfortable, will feel, if they feel anything other than gratitude for their own path, a kind of tender recognition, a sense of I understand why they cannot go where I am going. I hold nothing against them. For it, the bitterness that sometimes accompanies solitude is not a sign of spiritual advancement. It is a sign that the solitude has not yet been fully understood. The person is still interpreting their aloneness as rejection rather than as selection. And as long as they are doing that, the solitude cannot do its full work, because the full work of sacred solitude requires surrender, a genuine, voluntary, even grateful release of the need for the social approval that has not come. The moment you stop needing the builders to recognize your value is the moment you become available for the architect to use you. Let me speak now about what I call the state of divine amplification. You are not constantly pouring your energy into the maintenance of social relationships when you are not using your consciousness to manage impressions, to navigate expectations, to perform the elaborate choreography that ordinary social life demands. Something remarkable happens to that energy. It does not dissipate. It does not simply evaporate into the empty space left by the absent relationships. It concentrates. Concentrated consciousness is not the same thing as dispersed consciousness. It operates differently. It perceives differently. It creates differently. It has access to levels of intuition, of clarity, of creative power that dispersed consciousness simply cannot reach. Not because dispersed consciousness is inferior in kind, because depth, but requires concentration. This is what the scripture is pointing at when it says, "Enter into thy closet, and when thou hast shut thy door, pray to thy Father which is in secret." The closet, the shut door, the secret place. These are not merely instructions about physical privacy, descriptions of an interior condition, a state of concentrated, undistracted, inward-turned consciousness that makes available a quality of awareness that the outward-turned, socially engaged consciousness cannot touch. The Father who is in secret, the intelligence that does not operate on the surface of things, cannot be found in the crowd or the social gathering or the busy network of ordinary human connection. It operates in the depth, and the depth is only accessible from the inside, in solitude, in stillness, in the concentrated quiet that your life has been providing you, whether you asked for it or not. I want to tell you something about the law of divine timing, because I think this is where many people lose their way at precisely the moment when they are closest to their breakthrough. There is a season for everything. The scripture is absolutely clear about this. To everything there is a season, and a time to every purpose under heaven, a time to embrace, and a time to refrain from embracing, a time for the social world to open its arms to you, and a time for it to remain closed, not as punishment, not as rejection, but because the season you are in is not the season of social harvest. It is the season of interior cultivation. The farmer does not weep over the field in winter because it is not producing. The farmer understands that the field in winter is doing something that the summer cannot do, something invisible, something subterranean, something that is absolutely necessary for what will come. And the person who understands divine timing does not weep, or at least does not only weep over the winter of their social life. They understand, even in the depths of the loneliness, even when it is hardest to hold, that this is a season, that it has a purpose, it is producing something that the summer of full social connection could not have produced. This is not passive resignation. I want to be very clear about that. It is not a spiritual excuse for giving up. It is an active, engaged, eyes open participation in the process that your life is running. It is showing up fully to the winter, doing the winter's work, allowing the winter to complete what it came to do, so that when the season turns, and it will turn, you emerge into it. Not diminished by your solitude, but deepened by it, emptied but concentrated, not broken but refined. The scripture says, "Let your light so shine before men." And here is what I want you to understand about that instruction. It is not a command to be socially aggressive. It is not telling you to force your way into circles that have not welcomed you, to demand recognition that has not come, to perform for audiences that have not yet gathered. It is telling you to be what you are, fully, without apology, without the dimming and the shrinking and the self-reduction that ordinary social pressure demands of those who do not fit. Because here is the truth about light. It does not need to work to be seen. It does not need to push. It does not need to convince anyone. Light simply is, and everything in its vicinity is inevitably affected by it, drawn toward it or disturbed by it, but never indifferent to it. Your light, the specific, particular, repeatable quality of consciousness that is yours, has been shining through your entire period of solitude. You may not have felt it. You may have felt only the darkness of the empty room, the silence of the unanswered phone, the weight of another evening alone, but the light was there, and it was being concentrated. Like a lens that takes scattered sunlight and focuses it into something that can ignite your solitude has been focusing your light, taking what was diffuse and making it specific, taking what was broad and making it deep, taking what was pleasant and making it powerful. So I want to close tonight by asking you to do something. I want you to go back in your imagination with me right now to the most painful moment of your solitude, the moment that hurt the most, the evening that felt the most empty, the most shameful, the most like confirmation of everything you feared about yourself. Hold that moment. Do not flinch from it. Stay with it. And now I want you to look at it differently, not through the eyes of the person you were then, who did not yet understand what was happening. Look at it through the eyes of what you are beginning tonight to understand. That moment was not the world rejecting you. That moment was the architect working. The moment was not evidence of your inadequacy. That moment was the diamond being formed. That moment was not God's absence. The moment was God's most intimate and concentrated presence, working in you, through you, on you. A precision and a care and a specific intentionality that the noisy social world could never have provided the conditions for. Before I formed thee in the belly, I knew thee. You were known then. You are known now. You have always been known. And your solitude, every aching, quiet, misunderstood hour of it, has been the knowing hand of an infinite intelligence, leading you into exactly what you were chosen to be, not in spite of the silence. Through it, by means of it, in the fullness of it. Good night, and God bless you.